Well, welcome everybody to Haunted Episode 3. Today we're looking at Myrtle's Mirror. Now, Myrtle's plantation itself has this huge reputation. So we'll start there and then we'll get to the mirror as we move along, as we progress. It's run as a bed and breakfast today. I have to swallow my spit. The legend states that the Myrtles is haunted by a former slave that is seen roaming the grounds, and that she and her victims also haunt one mirror located in the main house. But it has a deeper history than that. The Myrtles itself was built by a man named Bradford, and he saw a ghost in the early he was a whiskey advocate, I believe it is called, where he fought for whiskey laws to be changed. And he built the home in 1796. He did build it and it does sit on an Indian burial ground. So these are things that come into play. And he claimed to see a ghost of a naked Indian girl long before we get to the next stage of the story. That being said, it brings into question not necessarily whether things are happening there or not, but what is the origin? You know, is it Chloe herself, which we will get to who she was, the slave girl, or whether this is something that predates her by being placed or built over a burial ground? There's definite questions around stuff like that. We had a situation here many years ago where a man and his partner built a little structure on a really large station. He worked on the station and him and his wife were very happy. By all accounts, they were a normal, happy couple. And they built this place on this property, this little place that they could stay in. And within months, he started exhibiting signs of violence. He started being nutty. All sorts of weird and strange things were going on for him. He was part Māori, and ultimately she ran away. She left. She couldn't stay with him anymore. And she said, you know, he was just going crazy. Now, he could have had a mental illness. We can't ignore the possibility of that. But the question around that comes from the fact that it was such a sudden change from this one man to the next man after this move. So within months, we're talking about, didn't take years. We went from a normal person to a person behaving incredibly oddly, very dangerously, wouldn't let people come near him, really, really crazy stuff. Now, the story as it evolves, they actually physically wrested him out of this house, that he would not leave. He would not work. He would not do anything. They took him out of this house, and again, within a matter of weeks, he came right. So we've got questions around that. Now, this is fairly recent history in New Zealand, so we know that he wasn't taken and medicated, for example. That didn't happen. Once they got him back into town, he just magically, over a couple of weeks, came right, and he couldn't explain it. But what he did say was he saw people. He said he saw Māori individuals. There were people floating through his home. He was claiming that everything he saw during that time was, in actual fact, a haunting that was driving him crazy. And he was encouraged basically he was trying to hide from this, but there was nowhere to go. But he was also told he couldn't leave and he wouldn't leave, and so on and so on. So this played this huge, huge role in his mindset and what he thought he could do, what he thought he couldn't do, what he should do, and all of those kind of things. So stuff happens. So we get to there. I'm not trying to tell you things can be haunted. I'm not trying to tell you things can be cursed. What I am trying to tell you is stuff happens. And after a certain amount of anecdotal evidence, you can poo-poo all of it if you really wish to, because we can poo-poo anything if we want to. If we choose to, we can just go, there are no anomalies on the planet. There is nothing strange that goes on ever. We can determine that because nothing has ever happened to us, or we can determine that based on the fact that every single person that recounts these stories is a liar and a cheat, and which, of course, defies all reason in itself. When you've got the occasional person, you can even claim mass hysteria, and there are things in the past that have sort of suggested that people go looking for and therefore see something that becomes an indication of a haunting or a curse when it's not the case. But these cases, these 3 episodes so far that I've been choosing, the ones that I choose to the future, have got some serious issues. They've got things going on that isn't normal, and they are extra what's the word I'm looking for there? It's not, we're not saying necessarily paranormal, but it might be. What we are saying, though, is there are deaths, there are illnesses, there are things that cannot necessarily be just explained away as these people are lying. You know, it goes a little bit further than that. When it comes to seeking out and trying to see something, then now we're in a position where if you go to the plantation, if you go to the Myrtles, right now today, you're going to be going there because it's beautiful, or you're going to be going there because you think you might see something. So you've got a pre-formatted idea. Now, the problem I have with that, particularly for anybody, whether it's past lives, whether it's seeing ghosts, as soon as you determine what the experience might be, you have pre-formatted your brain to look for something that matches your theory. I was talking very seriously about this to a lady, a student actually, the other day, and I was explaining to her that actually everything is a theory. Now, if you try to prove a theory, you are an unreliable witness. If you try to disprove a theory, you are an unreliable witness. If you have a theory that is the basis or foundation for evolution in your mind, new information that might come to dissolve it or enhance it, then suddenly you are a very reliable witness. You're not a skeptic and you're not a believer. A skeptic is a believer, by the way, just so we're clear. They're just a believer in not believing what you say. They're just a believer in whatever is in front of them. The word skeptic actually should be used in a positive force, but it tends not to be. There's this whole words around the word, the actual word skeptic itself, and you'll hear people that go onto television, their only claim to fame is being a skeptic. They write articles and blogs, and they will poo-poo everything, and I have seen often the facts being fudged to suit their particular belief. Now, their belief is this did not happen, which is not the same as being a skeptic. A skeptic is saying, well, it could have happened, but I need more evidence. That's a skeptic right there. It could have happened, but I need more evidence. It's not, it could not have happened. Very often they'll start their sentences with, I know that this person believes this is what happened for them. As soon as they say that, they have already discounted that person's experience, and they're not open to hearing what that experience is. They're not explorers. They're not investigators. They are simply detractors, and that makes them believers on the other side of the scale. So both sides of those scales are, in fact, unreliable witnesses. So what we've got here is a situation with some facts aligned to it, some belief of some people aligned to it, and we will let you decide, because that's what I like to do. So Bradford built this house and in 1796, as I already said, and it was built on an Indian burial site. So we know those things are true. It was built at a time when nobody was ever going to say no. Today, they probably would not have been allowed to build it. He saw this naked Indian girl. So I don't know, and nobody's ever going to know whether he had issues with what he had done or whether people had told him, you know, this is going to go bad. But there is belief around not building homes over burial sites, whether they be Indian, European, or otherwise. You don't go into a cemetery and just build on it. People are not happy about that. The living are not happy about that. But what you believe in regards to that does come into question. My point being is that if Bradford really believed that this would be an issue for him, he probably would not have built there. He might have bought the land and built somewhere else or whatever. He certainly had the money. And he was a noted figure in Pennsylvania at the time, and he was a lawyer. So he was very much into diatribe. He was very much into that whole process of nutting out contracts and issues and coming to deals. He was a rebellion in himself, but he did it with the law. So quite an interesting character. You can look up a bit on him. But he passed it on to his daughter Sarah and her husband Judge Clark Woodruff in the 1820s, and this is where our story starts really. When he passed on to him, it's to be noted that this girl Sarah grew up in that house. It was her family home, and she continued to live in that home when she married her partner, the judge. Now Chloe was, carrying on. They had 3 children. I just got a bit mixed up with my own info there. They had 3 children. Cornelia, Jane, and Mary, which in itself isn't so important, I suppose, the names of them. But they owned slaves, of course, and one of these slaves was a field hand by the name of Chloe. She is said to have been promoted to a house slave to act as a governess for the Woodruff children when they came along. And Chloe was apparently so grateful for her new position that when the judge, who was a womanizer, approached her for sexual favours, she went along in order to keep her new position. Now, this this actually intimates that she had a choice. So I'd like to say she probably didn't have a choice. If she wanted to keep her job, she probably had to go along, rather than she made a choice to go along. Being the judge's mistress, though, she now felt that she was good to go. You know, it didn't matter what happened now. She was going to be A-OK. She had a job. She had the judge not in her pocket, but, you know, he wanted her in other ways. So she realized that she probably wouldn't get sent out to the field. And to understand that, it's like to be a field hand slave would have been so much harder, so much more work, so much more physically devastating than being in the house proper. The work would have been easier. It would have been more pleasant. You get to dress nicer. You would be clean. They would ask for you to be clean. You know, it's just a whole different ballgame. So it's definitely a promotion. There's no doubt about that. But she must have fallen in love with the judge, or she may have had some issues with herself. I'm not too sure. She may have suffered paranoia issues, but she sort of decided one day that, you know, she was going to make sure that she knew exactly what was going on in the house. And she may have been concerned that she'd be sent back to the fields. There may have been something she did. We don't really know. But she did become increasingly paranoid and began to eavesdrop on the judge's private conversations. The judge caught her listening one day and ordered that one of her ears be chopped off as a punishment. For the rest of her short life, Chloe wore a green turban wrapped around her head so no one would see her wound. This is important because this comes into play later. Now she's afraid she's doomed. She's doomed to hard labour for the rest of her life. She came up with a plan, and the plan was to give the family poison. Not the best plans, but nevertheless, it's what her mind came up with. It may be that when she was paranoid and listening, she did have a disorder, or there was something going on with her, and this was the next stage of that, perhaps, but she was definitely trying to control her environment. There's no doubt about that, by listening and eavesdropping and knowing prior to any decisions what's going on. She's trying to control what is going on to a certain extent. So anyway, many believe she didn't intend to kill the family. I personally think that's debatable. The interesting thing is that if she was to make one of them sick, I actually would understand that as a motivation. If there was one of the kids got sick and then they said that she gave that child poison, she had access to those children, she could have given them something, because although they would have some family meals together, the chances of them children eating breakfast and lunch with their parents would probably be quite slim. Certainly breakfast, we are talking children. So quite an interesting thing here, where the story starts to, you know, it starts to open up some questions. If she wanted to make herself indispensable to the family, which is the general claim of her making the family sick, the family doesn't come into it because she only looked after the children. So she couldn't save the family by nursing them. The adults would have no doubt called in a local doctor or something like that. So there's aspects here that don't add up. But again, I think if she wanted to be indispensable and she wanted to nurse one of the children or nurse the children back to health for the parents' sake, then I would see that more as a single child thing, that she could make one child sick, nurse her back to health, and be seen as indispensable. At this point, though, she, according to everything I've read, hasn't done anything to get herself booted out except for eavesdrop. So by doing that, she's put herself in a more precarious position. So basically, she's put herself in this position and decides to poison the family. It's a huge question. Did she decide to kill the family, or did she decide to make the family sick? And the second option of just making them sick, I don't know, just doesn't sit right with me. She made a cake for Cornelia's upcoming birthday, and this is again the thing. She had access to the food. She's clearly able to cook for the family. She could have chosen this to be done anyway, but she crushed oleander leaves and boiled them and put the water into the cake. Unfortunately, she used too much, and the result was Sarah and two of her children, Cornelia and Jane, died. So that means we are talking the mother, the wife of the judge, the daughter of the builder of the house, and two of the children died. Now, why only these? Because the judge and baby Mary did not eat the cake. That's as simple as it gets. They didn't eat the cake, so they survived. Now, the fact that she poisoned the cake and she had no control over who was going to take it, forgetting how much she put in, and they say she put too much in, you have no control over how much they're going to eat either. So even if you put the right amount in for a certain type of intake, a serving, for example, you've got no guarantee that they wouldn't just scoff on that cake. You've got no guarantee that they wouldn't say, you go and feed these to your friends, you know, the leftover cake, or eat it yourself, or give it to the servants. So I find the story around making the family sick a little bit hokey. It just doesn't add up. And maybe that's at some point through history, the author's hoping that this was true rather than thinking it was true. Chloe did tell another slave about what she had done, and soon, obviously, the word got around. The rest of the slaves worried that they would be implicated in these deaths. So they took matters into their own hands, in fact, in order to gain favour with the judge, and they lynched Chloe and then weighted her body with rocks and threw it into the nearby river. That was done by the other slaves to protect themselves, and I completely understand that. That being the case, the fact that she told somebody else means she was either looking for support or she knew she would get caught out, that she would be caught out. The fact that they have a written record that the judge and Mary didn't eat this cake suggests that a long time ago they knew that's where it came from. They knew that this cake was the problem. Now, there is a record of a child dying of yellow fever, and I've seen a lot of people in their articles and the research that I did stating that this is how the family died, but actually it isn't how the family died. There is a recorded case of a child dying in their house, so we'll get to that in a little bit, from yellow fever. It wasn't long before witnesses claimed that they started seeing Chloe's ghost roaming through the plantation grounds, and it was considered to be her, for this figure wore the green turban. So that's where the green turban comes in, is that because of the green turban, they realised it was her. And so we've got a picture from quite a lot later, because obviously photographs were not there. This is Mr. Bradford. He was the man who built the house and first saw the Indian girl, naked Indian girl, after having built the house and moving in and living there. Now this, we can make this a bit bigger too for you to have a look at. You can make it bigger at any time. This becomes the photo from the 1990s, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but we'll put it there and you can see the figure. Or we'll just leave it a little bit smaller so you can see the house around it, because the actual gap between these two parts of the building is quite narrow. So the reason given as to why the mirror, Chloe ghost roaming around, the ghost roaming around the blah, 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 green turban, I'm catching up to where I was. A story then started circulating that the ghost also haunted a mirror that hung in the dining room where the family members died. Now, remember, this is how much poison they took. They didn't get out of the dining room and die ages later. They died fairly quickly in that space, in that room. So that leaves the subjectivity of what went on to be narrowed down significantly, because you know then it's something that happened in that space that caused it, that we can't say it was a disease that came later, that we haven't got them dying at different times or different dates. So it's a very interesting area to me that if they died in the dining room, it's pretty hard to go and start saying that they died of yellow fever or they died of this or that. The reason given as to why the mirror is haunted is based on an old superstition, actually, that connected to death and mirrors. It is said that the judge sealed off the dining room shortly after the death, no doubt because he was a judge, therefore he dealt with criminals. He realised that to find out the cause of it, what went on there, he would probably have to preserve everything that was in there, namely the food, so that it couldn't be taken away, thrown away, tampered with, so that they could decide what actually was done. No one was allowed in the room apparently for years, but there's no real proof of that. But certainly for a time it was sealed. Because of this, the mirror was left uncovered during the mourning period for this family, the family that was left, for his family, and when Chloe was hanged, which allowed their spirits to become trapped in the mirror's reflection. So this is what we've got going on there. There are a number of hauntings attributed to an extraordinary number of deaths at the Myrtles, which leads to it claiming the status of the most haunted house in America, and that's how it sells itself as a bread and breakfast now. There are a multitude of people that go through there simply to take a photograph of the mirror or to go and have a haunted experience. So I'll run through a little list of the people that have died there, and this harks back perhaps to Chloe and those that died, but it could also hark back to the burial site information. So we have a Civil War soldier died on the floor near the front door from battle wounds. He was an avid cigar smoker who stayed at the house before his death. The smell of cigars sometimes filled his room, and smoking wasn't allowed at the Myrtles, or isn't allowed at the Myrtles. So today we're talking about people claim to smell smoke. How many of them know the story? No idea. When you go into a place like this, if you research it first, by the way, if you want a ghost experience, the most compelling way to do that is to not research it first. You could go somewhere knowing it's been haunted, but don't look it up. Don't go, what are the stories surrounding it? Because as soon as you know that, you have a preconception, you have a preconceived idea. And as soon as you have that, you become an unreliable witness. Your mind will start turning creaks and groans, and we see things in the dark, or we see a movement, and suddenly it's going to be whatever it is you want it to be, especially if it aligns itself with somebody else. The steps heard on the stairs in the middle of the night are attributed to him also. And those who count claim the footsteps stop at the 17th step. Another young girl died of yellow fever in one of the upstairs bedrooms. Her parents called in a voodoo priestess to help her after all traditional medicines had failed. When the little girl died, the parents hung the priestess from the chandelier. Aho! So, there's a lot of disregard for life. In 1927, the caretaker of the property was murdered during a robbery attempt. The owners claimed that he can sometimes be seen at the plantation gates telling people to leave. Many visitors to the Myrtles take pictures of the mirror, hoping to capture some of the anomalies listed as handprints and drips and more, not to be mentioned seeing movement, faces, and other mysterious beings. It's a really interesting thing. In 1992, the proprietress of the Myrtles photographed what appeared to be a slave girl standing between two of the buildings on the plantation. And that's this one here. You can see here. And the next slide is a close-up of that. I will make it a bit smaller so we can see what we're looking at. There it is. This is the close-up of that, and make it bigger again and bigger again. There we go. Now, it's a really interesting thing because it, for all the world, definitely looks like a figure. It definitely looks like a person in a long dress, and it's incredibly clear. So we've got questions around this. The insurance company had required photographs to be taken that would show the distances between the buildings to aid the underwriters in rating a fire insurance policy for the plantation. That explains why the picture was taken. The National Geographic Explorer, which is to be noted, had a film crew that determined that the photograph definitely contained what appeared to be the apparition of what they believed to be, everybody's being careful, a slave girl. The slave girl appeared in the breezeway between the general store and the butler's pantry of the mansion. The horizontal exterior boards of the mansion were clearly visible through the body of the apparition. Let's see if we can see that. I'll make it bigger again. And if you're listening on Spreaker and iHeartRadio, you can come along to www.intuitalks.com, or you come along to energy-therapies.intuitalks, and you look at my archive shows. You click on shows in the menu, look on archive shows, and you can come along and you can load this and view it, so you can have a look at these for yourself. So let's have a look and see if we can see the boards through. I'd have to make that bigger because I can't get past the menu pop-up. There we go. Yes, you can. You can just see the lines through the figure. There's no doubt about that as it stands. So there we go. When we are looking at things like this, those are important little factors because clearly they're saying it's not a solid person in front of the boards. So that's interesting. Where are we? National Geographic Explorer used the photograph in their documentary and suggested that a postcard should be made of the photograph, which is what happened in the end. Mr. Norman Benowit, a patent researcher, visited the Myrtles plantation in 1995, this is 3 years later, and requested permission to research the postcard. After enlarging the postcard and doing a shadow density procedure, Mr. Benowit discovered that all of the physical measurements of the apparition were of human dimensions and proportions. The circumference of the head, the length of the shoulder to the elbow, and the length of the elbow to the wrist were all indicative of a human. In other words, he's saying it's not a bush. I guess that's what he's saying. But today we're here to talk about the mirror, the haunted mirror, and the stories that surround it. So, it's quite an interesting thing. So now what we're doing is we're going straight into the mirror images that we have. So I have to make that smaller again. And there we go. Now this is an image of the handprints. There's a claim that there are handprints that just every time the mirror gets cleaned, they come back. Now, there is a question around this as well. The current owners say that they have had it cleaned a few times. Apparently, there are owners before that have had it cleaned, but this handprint comes back and keeps coming back. That could have been done in the making of the mirror. We can all say that that's a possibility because we don't really know. But there was enough money in the household and there was enough history through the household to know that if that was the case, they could have had it repaired or they could have just bought another one. There are some articles that claim that this mirror isn't the original mirror, but according to the Myrtle-plantation owners, it's one of 3 original mirrors that are in the place, plus there's some artworks and so on. So the claim is there that it is, in fact, original. So that's the handprint that you can see there, and it definitely looks like 2 hands, and it looks like one is clenched. Now, the thing with that is a handprint, making a problem with the mercury paint on the background, at the back to make it a mirror, I should say. I get that, and so the question becomes, okay, we could see a handprint or fingers, perhaps more than a handprint. Doesn't make sense to have a whole handprint there if they didn't clean it properly. But one actually does look like a closed hand, and so that starts to not make so much sense all of a sudden, because if you were handling the glass or if you were handling the paintbrush or anything to make it into a mirror, the likelihood of you having a closed hand doing that would be just about non-existent. So that's one picture. And again, if you're on Spreaker or if you're listening on iHeartRadio, you can pop along to energy-therapies.intuitalks.com and click the shows, and then click the archives or recorded shows, and you can have a look, or you scroll down and you can have a look at this. It's Haunted episode 3. And this mirror, picture of the mirror was taken quite recently as far as it goes, I guess. Now, the claim is that we'll look at the side, that this is a face over here. You would have to determine that for yourself. I'm trying to look at the larger bit. It's right here. Sorry, a body. You can see that there's potentially a head, a torso and an arm in the border of the window reflected in the mirror. For many people, it becomes a question of, can we find anything in anything when we start looking for it? But you can actually see that with the lines here, that does seem to go against the other shapes, if you like, or the uniformity of shapes in the mirror. And the next picture we have here shows what appears to be a person standing behind the stairs, at the bottom of the stairs, and quite clearly they are behind the balustrade here. And I'll make that a little bit bigger again so you can have a look at it and decide for yourself whether you think it's real or not. Because in a modern world, the biggest enemy we have isn't actually the photos that are taken, but the ability to manipulate photography. So it becomes a less reliable source of information now than it once did. So it's an interesting area. When you have a look at this as an apparition, it's definitely not clear. It's unlikely because of the light that it's actually a person going up the stairs behind the photographer. There's also a lack of detail, which would probably be there considering the detail and the lights up here, just so as we're clear on that. And very interesting anyway. And that's the last photo. Oh, no, it's not. We have one more. We have one more. And this one points to what appears to be a face on the stairs. Okay. This is reflected through the mirror. I'll make this smaller so you can see the whole picture. This is actually reflected in the mirror. So there it is there, how it would have looked when they got their picture back. Now, if we look at these girls, and let's have a look at what kind of camera they're using. So you see their reflections quite clearly in that. And I'm trying to see, but I can't see which one's taking the photo. This one's got a camera slung over her shoulder. I'm not sure that she's taking a photo at all, actually. So neither of them appear to be taking a photo, so they may be just in the picture. But above their heads, we have this image, which is not in any other photo that I've seen. So there you go. And you can decide for yourself what you believe about these. When you do load the imagery up for this, when you load the show, it takes a little while to load an Intuitalks show. but we have got these photos and these pictures, and that's why the more pictures, the longer it takes to load. So this shouldn't be too bad. The longer the show, the longer it takes as well. But once you do, down the left-hand side, you're going to see all of the photos, all of the slides that we use. So you can just pop through at any time. If you're watching the show for the first time, you can just click through to the images you want to see once it's loaded. Without buffering, it just instantly goes to that point. It instantly goes to that point of conversation as well. So the slide and the conversation, or me, come along at the same time. So I hope you enjoyed this show. Next week, we're talking about the Dybbuk, hang on, I have to remind myself, the Dybbuk box. Yes. Next week, we're talking about the Dybbuk box, which has a very dark history indeed. So I'm looking forward to bringing that forward to you. That will be the 4th, and we are then halfway through our little series of Haunted. So I hope you enjoy them, and ciao. Remember, this week, don't be a part of your own problem, and see you next week. Bye for now.